Hello everyone, my name is Alex. I'm a 2000 rated over-the-board chess player, and in this series we're going from 1500 to 2000 elo in chess.com rapid games, where I'll be explaining my thought process as best as I can for your education and entertainment. Today we have a Vienna, and we will see, we'll see whether my opponent chooses knight to f6, which would be the start of the Vienna Gambit, and he absolutely does. Now, I have a full guide to the Vienna Gambit, the Vienna Game, on my channel, so if you want to learn it for yourself, you can check that out, but for the time being, let's play f4 and initiate the Vienna Gambit. Now, as opposed to the majority of gambits, black can't really take this pawn. Now, the reason is because this is basically a king's gambit, except we have knights on c3 and f6, which changes the dynamic completely, because black's knight on f6 ends up being a target if he takes. So like I said, you can check out my full guide if you want to learn all the theory on that. But my opponent plays d6, so taking here isn't amazing. We kind of want to leave the tension, and we kind of want to encourage black to take us. So we can continue with the move bishop c4. Now this is slightly, I don't know if dubious is the right word, but it's an interesting move because we are giving black a very interesting option of knight takes e4, which is kind of a an adaptation of the center fork trick, which you may be aware of in the Four Knights Italian, something like that. So basically, if black takes on e4, and we take back on e4, he can play the move d5, forking our minor pieces in the center of the board, right? And after we play a move like bishop d3, and he takes our knight and we take back, and he takes on f4 and we play knight f3, stopping queen h4, black has a pretty good position. However, after knight takes e4, we can consider the move bishop takes f7, which is my intention. Black does not go for it though, he plays bishop e6, which seems like a very strange move, because I'm going to snap that, and then I'm going to snap on e5, and you can see that I'm just going to give black doubled isolated pawns in the center of the board. He pretty much has to take this, he has no other good option. And, I mean, we can just play knight to f3, applying pressure to e5. Now, interestingly enough, some of these positions are actually playable for the black pieces. Although this pawn structure looks horrific, in fairness, these pawns do control some very important squares, right? All the squares that they control are very useful, and I will be fighting for those squares most likely. However, they are obviously incredibly weak, and the e6 is maybe vulnerable to a knight g5 in the future. I mean, obviously we're applying pressure to e5 for the time being, but it's not simple for us to win the pawns. It's not the easiest job in the world. Black can play bishop d6, knight c6 to defend the e5 pawn very nicely. We're probably just going to castle and play d3. In some of these positions, d4 is probably a move to try to open the center up, but obviously that comes with a lot of risks because, okay, not risks, but we're basically undoubling black's pawns for him, which is obviously something that we need to be incredibly sure of doing if we're going to do it. So after knight c6, I'm just going to play d3, get this very solid pawn chain. My e4 pawn is very secure. This knight can go and do something else if it wants, because it doesn't have to defend e4. Black has no d or f pawn to challenge my e pawn, and of course his e pawns can't move because they're behind each other, and my e-pawn is in the way of any movement. Bishop c5 is interesting, so stopping me from castling. So maybe I should have castled first, thinking about it. Yeah, okay. Anyway, we have options, though. We don't necessarily have to castle just yet. We could consider knight to a4, chasing the bishop. And if, like, bishop d6 castles, our knight's actually quite safe. I mean, if b5 knight c3 and then he comes back with the check, we can always just move the knight out the way. if here and queen d6 supporting the bishop and something like take, that's also quite interesting, which would still stop us from castling. Also, knight g4 should be considered as a potential threat for black, trying to come in on f2. Maybe I've given black a bit more than I should have. I'm going to play knight a4. I think it's the principled thing to do. Even if he plays queen d6, which I think is probably the best move. Which the whole idea is, yes, you're giving up the bishop, but you maintain control of this diagonal. Knight to g4 is still an idea, and I still can't castle. Although he can do that, it feels correct to get this bishop off of the board regardless. So if queen d6, knight d6, knight c5, queen c5, maybe h3, just stopping knight g4, castles kingside, or even queenside. He could go queenside. I think black's actually doing okay there. And this is what I mean by these pawns actually not being that bad. Obviously, they are weak. Like, it's clear that they're weak. They can't be defended by another pawn. Unlike my central pawn, which is just defended by a pawn, these pawns need to be defended by pieces because they have no neighbouring pawns, because they're isolated, right? However, they are controlling very important squares, right? Arguably, black has better control of the centre than I do, because he has 2 pawns right up in the centre, and I only have 1. You could argue my d3 pawn, maybe, but arguably black has better central control, is my point. However, in the long run, if we can survive the opening, basically... Well, by the way, I should have castled before I played d3. Absolutely, I should have castled. No doubt about it. Then, in the long run, we should be positionally better, basically, because the pawns will be weak. So my opponent does go queen d6, which I think is probably the best move. So he still stops us from castling. While it may be very tempting to play queen e2 to try and play bishop to e3, it's something that I'm considering. I am quite concerned about knight d4 though, and I would basically have to trade knights and then my opponent can fix his structure. I suppose I get castled there, but my c2 pawn is quite weak. I could consider c3, stopping this move, although after something like castle's queenside, my d3 pawn is quite weak, and my e4 pawn is weak because the rook is pinning this pawn to my queen. So maybe queen e2 is still the best option. And if knight to d4, knight d4, if queen takes, I mean just bishop e3, queen b2 is interesting. Castles, I could maybe give the pawn up and look for counterplay. Yeah, maybe. But I think I should go for this. Queen e2 also means that knight to g4 doesn't really come with any threats because we are monitoring the dark squares very well. h3 was interesting to stop knight g4, but after castles, knight to b4 is a big threat. So I was thinking, well, I have to play queen e2 in that case anyway to unpin the d-pawn. And then I've just wasted h3 because... I mean, he can't go knight g4 after queen e2 regardless, and I'm going to have to play queen e2 at some point. So, okay. Black has a bit of a decision to make, and he castles queenside. Okay, interesting. So, bishop e3 is basically forced, and I think this is pretty much forced. I mean, he could be tricky and play queen to b4, which is an interesting idea. And after maybe knight to d2, queen b2, castles kingside. We have the open b file, we have a strong bishop. We're down a pawn, he could take a second pawn, but I don't know. Rook c1, rook b1 looks incredibly dangerous. Knight c4 could be strong. Or even knight b3, knight c5. He does go for it though. Very, very bold. So of course... Oh no, we could block with the c pawn, which would defend the b pawn actually. Oh yeah, that's definitely the move. 100% the move. And because our queen is on e2, there are no threats of knight e4 with the d pawn being pinned. Now, what c3 does do is it controls d4, which stops any knight d4 ideas, which means our bishop is incredibly strong, which is great. But it does weaken the d3 pawn, of course. So I may castle queenside so that I have a rook on d1. Although, if my opponent goes queen a4, then I can't castle queenside. Not least because d1 is controlled and you can't castle through a check, but also because a2 would be hanging in that line. So if queen a4, kingside castle, knight g4 going after my bishop. Something like rook d1, knight e3, queen e3. I feel like I should be better there because, I mean, I feel like I've got play. Okay, queen e7. Really? Really? Queen e7? Okay, that seems passive. Well, now we can castle queenside, and I feel like we should, because the king is going to be very safe on b1. What you'll also notice in this position is that it kind of harks back to something I was talking about earlier in the game, where I was saying that d4 is one of those moves that sometimes is begging to be played. Like, our structure clearly indicates that we could be playing the move d4 because it's supported by the rook, the c-pawn, the bishop on e3, and the knight on f3. Right? It has incredible support for d4. Now, for the time being, our e-pawn would hang, but it would also, if a trade were to occur, undouble the e-pawns for the black side. So should we do that? I don't know. King b1 looks like a completely valid move. If knight to g4, I mean, I think we can just drop our bishop back and then kick the knight away. I'm not too concerned about that. By the way, if you're enjoying the video so far, please drop a like and subscribe if you haven't already. I'd really appreciate it. And let's just go king b1. Nice and simple. As I said, endgames should always favour us, simply because we have a better pawn structure. King b1, I'm just defending a2, getting off of this diagonal, could be annoying. Okay, g5. Okay. Well, let's play h3, of course, stopping pawn g4, which would kick my knight away from its nice position. And also, it stops knight to g4. I suppose my opponent is thinking of knight to h5, going for either g3 or f4. However, on knight to h5, we have knight takes e5. And if knight to f4, we of course just take it. And if knight to g3, forking my queen and my rook, I believe... Wait, do I have knight c6? Of course, if you take my queen, I'll take your queen with check, so you have to take back. Something like queen f2, knight h1, rook h1, rook f8. I'm not convinced. Not convinced. I mean, I'm winning the a7 pawn, so I'm going to get 2 pawns for the exchange, but maybe I should just go pawn g4. Just stopping knight to h5 and any shenanigans that may come with it. Although I suppose if knight h5, knight takes e5, knight g3, knight takes c6 comes with check, but that doesn't actually change anything because black would have had to take back anyway. So one of the important things here is that h5 can't be played because g5 will hang, which means that this knight can't access the f4 square. It would have to somehow get to g6. You would have to like bring this knight to e7, g6, and f4, but you also have to watch out for the weakness of the e5 pawn. So I'm going to go rook h to f1. Of course, the f-file is very important now. We are fighting over the f-file. We also have maybe ideas of queen h2 going after e5. I don't think so, to be honest, because I think the queen on e2 is quite good, just defending everything. Okay, knight e8. Interesting. Knight d2 looks strong. Opening up the f-file for trades and also preparing knight c4, which looks decent. Maybe this knight wants to come to d6, although I don't think it's doing anything useful there. Let's go knight d2. And this is why I like my queen on e2 as well, because it's defending d3 in the absence of this rook, because it's now blocked off. And trades, I'm happy to trade. I'm more than happy to trade, because like I said, endgames should favour us. Now, if all the pieces come off the board and we're left with just kings, maybe that's just a draw, because these pawns will actually do quite a good job of stopping my king from infiltrating. Ooh, bringing the knight back? Really? Well, that feels wrong. Let's play knight c4. I don't think we need to overcomplicate this. Just apply pressure to e5. And now the difference from the knight being on f3, obviously it's performing the same role on c4, but on f3 it's blocking the f-file. I would like to use the f-file. I'd like to play something like rook f3 and rook f to d1 to double up. I may even be tempted to bring the king to c2 to watch the d3 pawn, although I could potentially play something like rook 1 to f2 and queen to f1 to form the full... Is that Alekhaine's gun? I think it's Alekhaine's gun. And the queen would still watch over the d3 pawn, which, like I said, is kind of the weakness of our position. Okay, a6. Not concerning. Doesn't really do anything. If b5, I'll just play knight... Sorry. No, I don't have knight to a5. What am I on about? For some reason, I thought I did. So if b5... I can always come to a3 if I want. I'd rather not, but... I could also come just to d2, which is probably fine. I am aware that bishop c5 exists in some of these positions with skewers, but I don't want to play b4. Should I play b4? I mean, just knight to d7 stops bishop c5. And then why is my pawn on b4? So let's not. Let's just go rook f3, preparing rook d to f1. I assume my opponent was just taking his pawn off of a potentially vulnerable square, because my bishop, of course, sees the a7 pawn. My bishop is quite good, because a lot of my pawns are on light squares. My bishop kind of monitors the dark squares that the pawns can't see. Of course, still, if h5, I can take on g5, which is very useful. Okay, does bring the knight back to d7. Let's double up. Rook d2, f1. Now, black could facilitate a bunch of trades on the f-file. He could play something like take, rook here, queen f2, take, and queen to f8, take, and knight takes. So he could trade all the major pieces off the board. But as I said, I think that benefits us because we have a better pawn structure. Also, if all the major pieces come off the board, we can play king c2 and defend d3 very easily, and our king will not be vulnerable because our c-pawn stops the knights from coming to d4 or b4. So our king will be very, very safe. Here, I don't like taking with the queen, because after rook f8, we can't take because the knight will take. So we should probably take with the rook. And after rook f8, queen f2 looks pretty good. Whoa, b6, what does that even do? I don't know. Let's play queen f2. I mean, I'm stopping anything from coming to c5 because you'll just ruin your structure, and then I'll play something like this, and the rook will defend d3, also defending h3. Again, if he wants to go rook to f8, I'm happy to trade all the pieces, because I believe that I am the only person who can win the endgame. If all the major pieces come off the board, which I think they're about to, we will be in an endgame where either white wins or we draw. I don't see a feasible way for black to win the endgame. So that's what's known as a two-result game, where with, you know, reasonably good play, normally games are a three-result game, where either white can win, they can draw, or black can win, right? But I want a two-result endgame where, realistically, either white wins this, or black manages to get a draw. I mean, my bishop is so strong. I'm going to bring my king to c2, I think, just to monitor d3. Also, just get the king into the game, which is good endgame technique. I maybe have h4 in the future. So maybe I should just bring my king to g3 and play h4 and try to exploit the h6 pawn. That kind of thing. As I said, these pawns are weak, but they do monitor some very useful squares. Okay, knight to g6. Not gonna lie, I completely underestimated this move. Maybe I have to go d4 now. I completely missed that move. Knight f4 is a really annoying thing to deal with. I'm gonna have to take it. Okay, let's go d4. Now, if we trade, I get a very strong center. This is a bit annoying. If the knight comes to h4, I don't care. The knight isn't targeting anything on h4. The problem is, if the knight comes to f4, it hits the h3 pawn, and I'm going to have to take it. Whoa, what is that? Okay, what if I take? Or what if I play d5? Is d5... No, d5 isn't viable. No. I have to get rid of this pawn, because otherwise the knight comes here, and after take... I'm in trouble. So I'm going to have to take this. This is a little bit strange, though. I'm a bit confused. Because the knight comes here, right? Bishop d4. And I want to go to g7 and win h6. Here. 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 Take. Here, check. Here, take. I suppose everything is getting traded? But do I have to do that? Do I have to do that? Do I have any other options? I'm not really seeing any. Because the problem is, if the knight comes to g6 and then he goes e5, knight to f4, I'm going to be in big trouble. Because I'm going to have to take it. And then his e-pawn is probably going to take back. And he's going to get a protected passed pawn. And my king is going to be forced to just sit there and watch it. While his king goes and picks up all my pawns. Okay, that is very interesting. I'm not convinced. I think that's too passive. The point is that if bishop g7, then this is preemptively defended, which is, you know, makes sense. But the knight is very, very passive on this square. Bishop here looks interesting. Preparing the move e5. And then the knight will be completely dominated. Yeah, so my opponent goes e5, which is smart. But I feel like because these pawns are on dark squares, I probably have an advantage. Because my bishop can target many pawns at once. I don't know what I'm going to do with my king, though. I think I probably have to try to get it into the game. So let's play this. Although if take knight here, king here... No, you just have to go back and defend. You have no choice. Let's take. Ooh, okay, interesting. Should probably freeze the pawns. I think this is probably a draw. Tough to say. I like this bishop e7 move, because I want to put the bishop on f8, I think. with the idea of monitoring h6 and also stopping any c5 ideas. And if the king comes to e8, then I suppose just bishop g7, and the king can't come to f7 to kick me away. The king has no way to kick my bishop, because it would mean the knight has to move and then h6 falls. So again, I'm trying to get a situation where we are the only, where we're the only one that can win. It's an interesting move. So trying to come to f6 maybe? The question is, should I march over here and do this? Probably. That's my only way to win this, right? If knight d6... that's really annoying, actually. Because if I take on h6, he takes on e4 with check. Okay, king f6. Yeah, see, this I wasn't concerned about. Now I think we're winning after king b3, because a4 is going to happen. And you have to take it, because otherwise I push a5 and the pawn just runs. So after a4 you have to take this, and then my king gets in. And then we have a lot of pressure on the position. And also you don't have knight d6 anymore to counterattack, because my bishop covers that. Although you may be defending h6, your knight's going to have to do this to get out. Can I just go here and stop that? Stopping knight d8 and knight d6. The knight doesn't have many squares. a4, you can't stop a4. a4 is coming no matter what you do. Now we have to use a pawn break to get the king into position because everything else is covered. That's interesting. Didn't even consider that he could do that. Okay, let's push. Of course, if takes, the king just comes in. We can't allow that. The issue is, something like take, and knight to h6, and I can't defend g4. Maybe I can win e5 in return. Or just go win c6. Yeah, that's smart. Did not consider that. Also, if I go here, then he just takes here and defends the e5 pawn. So I'm going to have to come around like this. And I also can't stop him from winning the e4 pawn, I don't think. Because he's just going to go here. So I'm going to get my own passed pawn. Wait, take, here, 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 here. We promoted this in... Sorry, he promotes first. Oh, he probably wins after queen b... Sorry, yeah, queen b... Oh, no, he can't play queen b1. Queen c1... only black can win, because he's the one to promote first. So what if I take knight e4, and I just push? The knight actually can't come to either of these squares, so I don't really see how the knight stops my pawn. And my bishop can always easily get to a square where it can sacrifice itself for one of the pawns. That won't be too difficult. If knight here, I can also consider king to d5, although then this is maybe annoying, and then you get to b5, and that might draw. So it's probably best for me just to push immediately. And then if black pushes and I push and black pushes, I probably win. It's an interesting move. Again, if I take, then black promotes first. So what if I go here and then take and then bishop back? It's playable. If I push and then push and then push and then push and then bishop here, I can stop the promotion. If I push and knight take and then push and then push and then push and then push and then promote, and if you promote, then I give a check from behind and I win the queen. Okay, so I think I should push because I always have this brutal check if the knight moves. Yeah, I think this is winning. I think this is winning. Because your knight just can't stop me from promoting. Yes, you're stopping bishop c5, because you will take me, but that's not the point. The point is I have queen g8. And I just pick up your queen, and that's game over. Yeah, queen here, check. This is why promoting first is so strong, because you get to give the first check and exploit the way that your opponent's pieces are kind of positioned. So my opponent resigns because he's going to have to move his king, and then I pick up the queen, and obviously this is completely winning. Super interesting game. I think I misplayed the opening a bit. The endgame was very interesting, though, knight versus bishop. Not sure how I actually did there, like whether I gave the game away a couple times, but let's check with the engine. I hope you guys enjoyed the game, and let's jump into the analysis. Okay, that game actually went better than I thought it did in terms of the analysis. So we had 90.7% accuracy. My opponent had 83.9%. So a very accurate game overall. We of course start with a Vienna Gambit with f4, d6. Here, to be honest, I don't know why I didn't play knight to f3. I know this is the best move, so I don't know why I didn't play it. I don't know, I've been toying with different move orders. Bishop c4 isn't the best, though. As I said, knight e4 can be absolutely considered here, because if here, something like ef4, black is better. So actually, our best course of action is to do this. And if this, we have knight e5 and we're winning. But after this, knight e5, very interesting position. But my opponent goes bishop e6. So we, of course, trade. We take on e5. The engine prefers this, interestingly, because it doesn't care about ruining black's pawn structure. Because it says, well, if black takes us, then we get d4. And then there's no e5 to support this pawn. So after something like knight c6, bishop f4, bishop e7, d5, we're apparently winning. So, very interesting. I, however, thought, well, we'll just ruin the black pawn structure, and it'll be great. But as we saw in the game, black's weak pawns in the center didn't actually play that big a role. They were actually decent. So we go d3, bishop c5. In retrospect, I would have castled here. The engine, however, disagrees, and it actually thinks that we're in trouble after this, which does make sense. Queen e1, knight d4. Yeah, we're not actually doing very well here, because we are getting overrun a bit. So d3 is actually the best move. Bishop c5, knight a4 is the best move. I thought that if bishop d6 and castles and something like b5, knight c3, bishop c5, returning, I thought we were doing well here. The engine says that after knight g4, this time we're better. Because now with knight d4, it's different. Because we take on b5, so yeah, my opponent went queen d6, which I thought was very good. Take, and queen e2. The engine prefers a3, which I can't explain. No, actually, it prefers queen e2. Yeah, I don't know why it says good when it says it's the best move. I don't know. My opponent castles queenside. I was expecting knight d4 here, where I would be forced to trade and fix black's pawn structure. And then I was just going to castle. And after black castles, I mean, we just have a game of chess. I don't know, bishop f4. Okay, apparently that's bad. Apparently that's bad. We're supposed to play h3. I couldn't tell you why. Because the knight can't come here anyway. But, okay. Castle's queenside. Bishop e3, queen b4, and here we go c3, which is the best move. Now, initially I was considering knight d2. And after queen takes b2, I thought castles was interesting, because after takes, we have counterplay. However, I missed the fact that after rook to c1, black can just take on d3, and then we have nothing. So c3 is the only move, hitting the queen, defending this. I was expecting queen a4 here, which is the best move, stopping us from castling queenside. And here knight g5 is suggested by the engine. Rook h8, and then knight h3 is the move. What, to come to f2? Yeah, what? Knight e7, it wants the knight on f2 to just monitor these pawns. That's not a very human maneuver. My opponent went queen e7. What? Queen? Okay, b4 is the best move. And we are just going to attack. And when you look at it, yeah, this is actually quite strong. Let's say king b8, b5, knight a5. Oh, we win e5. The knight is overloaded. The knight's overloaded. So what about queen d6, b5, knight e7? We can't take because of b6, and we're just going to lose the bishop. So bishop d2 is the move. Yeah, of course. Of course. Giving up the d pawn for what? For knight e5. And after rook back, we get knight f7. Can't the rook just go some... Oh no, the rook can't go anywhere else. That's its only move. Okay, that's really interesting. I castle queenside though. b4 I did not see. We're still better though. h6, I was expecting knight g4. Although we do just have this and the knight has to return. So h6, king b1, g5, h3. The engine does prefer b4. I considered b4, but I didn't play it because it looked ridiculous. But it's actually the best move. h3, king b8, g4, rook h2, f8. We are slightly better. Rook hf1 isn't the best. Knight d2 is better immediately. But okay, rook h2, f1, knight e8. h4 is best. Oh, right. And then something like... Okay, we're just going to push the pawn through. And this is very weak. Interesting. Knight d2 is what I played. Knight f6, knight c4. We still maintain an edge. a6, rook f3. The engine prefers rook h1 to try and play h4, I guess. Rook f3, knight d7, rook d to f1. I thought that I was happy with just trading all the pieces. I thought this was better for us, and it is slightly better for us. King c2, knight g6. Here, though, I played d4. And the reason was because I was thinking, well, if I play a move like knight d2, then knight to f4, and I'm going to have to take, which is true. But the engine says, well, actually, no, we can just go knight f3. And the knight stops the pawn, and then we can use the king to, you know, create play. I didn't realize this. The engine also comes up with the idea of bishop f2. And after knight to f4, the obvious move, we go h4. So we support h4 preemptively. And these pawns are weak. I again didn't consider this. The engine wants black to trade the remaining pawns. And here we just have a better structure. And I don't know. This is an interesting position. Oh, that would blunder. Yeah, so white is in the driver's seat. I panicked a bit, to be honest, and played d4. b5, knight e5, knight ce5, d takes e5, knight takes e5. And we're better after bishop d4 only move. The reason is because if we play something lazy, like b3, for example, stopping this, then the knight comes to g6. And now if we try to infiltrate, then just e5. And then knight to f4, and I thought this was very scary. Engine thinks it's okay, but it's a draw. So bishop d4, and we... Whoa, c4 is the move. What? What if take? Okay, what's wrong with bishop g7 then? Is that what I played? No, I went king to d3. It all should be a draw, but white is, like, slightly better. King b7, e5 is the way to go here. I thought I could go bishop c5 in this position, and I thought we had good play. Again, the engine says draw, but practically who knows. So king b7, bishop f6, e5, c4, c6, cb5, ab5, b4 is wrong. King c3 is better, which I considered trying to come in, but I thought that king b6, and I can't do this because of this, but now the engine wants bishop e7, so that if this, there is no c5 because of take, and if c5 straight away, which is the only move, then I couldn't figure out what I was doing, which is why I didn't go for this. Engine recommends a4, and if take, then king c4 is winning, because I'm going to win this pawn and my king's going to infiltrate. And if black pushes, we are still winning. So the only move is king c6, just a waiting move. And a5 is not good, because knight d6, and this is a draw. b4, c4, both kings have to stop these pawns. I went b4 though. King c7, this is a complete draw, but I thought we had good play. And then we get to a position where h5 is played. I went a4, ba4, king a4, and it's still a draw. But I thought that because we have the bishop, we have better chances, because bishops, with pawns on both sides of the board, right, the bishop can go between both sides of the board very, very quickly. The knight can't. So I thought that we must be in the driver's seat. I missed this though, knight h6. Knight h6 is the only move. Everything else is losing. And I missed that he could do this a few moves back. So he does it. King a5, knight g4, king b6, knight f6, king c6. And here black has one move. There is one move for black to draw. Everything else loses. The move my opponent played, which is g4, loses. Can you find the move that draws for black? The move is king f7. Asking my bishop what it's doing. If I move my bishop, then after something like take, this is a draw. After king e6, bishop b8, knight to c3. And what will happen is black will sack the knight for the pawn, and then I will sack my bishop for this pawn, and it will be a draw. Alternatively, if I push, then we're losing, because the knight will just stop the promotion, and this pawn will run through. So we can't do that. If we take the knight, then after king takes, we promote first. Queen and queen. So we have the better chances, but it is a draw. We can take this pawn, and we can try and win this, but it's drawn. My opponent, though, goes g4, and this doesn't work because of b5. And now king f7 isn't good enough, because after bishop d6, the situation changes. Because after knight e4, bishop e5, your knight can't stop the pawn. And we're also stopping this. So if g3, we can just take and push. And your king or your knight can't get back in time. So knight e4 is what my opponent played. And we just go b6. And the problem is, after g3, I can't try and stop the pawn. Right? If I try and stop the pawn, then I'm losing. Because black promotes with check. But I don't have to. I can just promote, give a check from behind, and black resigns because I just pick up the queen. A super interesting endgame, and hopefully a very interesting game in general. I hope you enjoyed, and if you came this far in the video, then thank you so much for watching the full length. If you want to see how to play the Vienna for yourself, my full Vienna guide, then check out the video up here. And if you want to see the previous episodes of the speedrun, check out the playlist down there. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in one of those videos.